My name is Adrian Hale, and responsibility has a way of finding me even when I don't go looking for it. I'm 31, the younger of two brothers, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one who shows up with a mop and a plan after a storm someone else created. My parents, Ruth and Daniel, never said my brother Miles was perfect, not outright, but they spoke about him like a someday that would surely arrive. He's got so much potential, they'd say, and I'd nod while stacking chairs or paying a bill the unglamorous present tense that made their future tense possible. By the time I hit my 30s, I had built something small but steady, a three-person IT support firm wedged between a coffee shop and a florist on Briar Street. It wasn't the kind of business that turned heads at reunions, but it paid the lease on a modest condo, kept reliable tires under my car, and let me sleep without checking my bank app at 2 in the morning. I learned how to invoice, how to keep promises, and how to say, I'll handle it without resenting the person who needed things handled. Miles was 2 years older and light on ballast. He could charm a room, spin a story, sell a dream, and then somehow leave before the cleanup. He married Sophie, they had two kids with serious eyes and sticky hands, and he drifted from job to job with the same optimism he brought to everything. This one will pan out. When his number flashed on my phone late one Thursday, I knew before I answered, before I heard the scrape in his voice, that something had come due. Adrian, he said, and the way he said my name carried a weight I'd heard too many times. I'm in a bind. Cards are maxed. There's a notice on the car. The mortgage is behind, and if we miss another payment. He stopped to breathe, or to keep from breaking. I don't know what to do. There's a knot I carry under the ribs, a quiet old ache that tightens whenever I hear him like that. The knot remembers all the years, all the rescues. I looked at the framed photo on my desk, our parents on a ferry, cheeks pressed together against the wind, and then I pictured Miles's kids asleep somewhere down the hall of a house that might not be theirs much longer. I didn't deliver speeches about personal responsibility. I didn't put terms in an email. I opened my banking app, moved $1,400 from the account where I'd been saving for new equipment, and sent it to him. No interest, no IOU, no conditions. Just a line in the ledger, brother to brother. He called back 10 minutes later, gratitude stumbling over itself. You saved us, he said. I could hear Sophie in the background saying thank you in a voice that sounded both relieved and embarrassed. For an hour after we hung up, my apartment felt lighter, as if the air itself had unclenched. Maybe this would be the turn. Maybe the next chapter would be different. A week later, my Aunt Lila hosted a Sunday potluck at her townhouse. The place filled with noise, cousins ferrying casserole dishes through a too-narrow kitchen, uncles arguing about the ball game, kids fencing with plastic forks. I carried a tray of roasted vegetables to the counter and reached for a serving spoon when I heard Miles's laugh from the balcony, the bright one he uses when the punchline is himself and the room is generous. Yeah, Adrian helped out a bit, he was saying to our cousins Tom and Rhea. His voice floated in through the open door, easy, unbothered. 14.5, nice of him, sure. But you know how he is, always has a cushion. He could have done more if he wanted to. Tom made a noise that could have been agreement or discomfort. Rhea tried to change the subject. Miles barreled on, clapping Tom on the shoulder. That's our Adrian. Big on speeches, small on checks. The serving spoon slipped in my hand and clattered against the counter. No one turned. Heat rose up my neck and pooled under my collar. For a second, I saw the transfer screen in my mind, the green confirmation checkmark, the little whoosh icon, as if it had been a joke I was slow to get. $14,500. The number thudded in my chest. That was most of the upgrade budget I'd spent months building, the part that would have replaced aging laptops and finally let me hire a fourth tech. In his mouth, it became a footnote, a shrug, evidence that I had held back. I didn't walk onto the balcony and make a scene. I didn't call him a liar in front of the family. I set the tray down, stepped into the hallway, and found a bathroom where I could lock the door and look at my own face in the mirror while the party murmured on the other side of the wall. My heartbeat tapped against the glass. I waited for anger to crest and break. It didn't. It simmered low and steady, the kind that heats a room without anyone noticing until the windows fog. I drove home early, blaming a Monday morning install that didn't exist. In the quiet of my living room, I tried to rewrite what I'd heard. Maybe he was kidding. Maybe he was nervous and performing. Maybe I was thin-skinned from a long week. but the words wouldn't soften. They replayed like a loop. He could have done more. Big on speeches, small on checks. The arrogance of it, the entitlement to reshape my help into a slight and then laugh about it over paper plates. I stood at my kitchen counter and did the math again like it might console me. What I'd sent, what I had left, what I'd planned to buy in Q2. Numbers are honest. They don't pretend to be something else. 14.5 wasn't a drizzle to me. It was a redirected river. The more I thought about it, the more something in me that had always bent began to stiffen. The knot under my ribs didn't go away. It changed shape. It learned a new language boundary. I could feel the words settling into the spaces where reflex used to live. The reflex that made me open the app and press send. The reflex that told me quiet people are good people, that keeping the peace is the same as keeping your dignity. Somewhere between the balcony and my front door, that belief cracked. What was I keeping exactly, if not the very pattern that had kept us all in place? I didn't text Miles that night to ask what he meant. I didn't call our parents to tattle on him or search for a referee. I brushed my teeth, set my alarm, and lay in the dark listening to the building's elevator cables hum. In the quiet, I thought about the version of me my family had come to rely on, the emergency contact, the late-night ride, the bailout. I wasn't angry at the younger Adrian who made that possible. He'd kept people afloat. But I could see with a clarity that startled me the cost of always being the net. People forget there's a body attached to it. They jump because they assume you'll catch them. When morning came, I went to the shop and answered tickets and drank coffee that had sat a minute too long on the burner. My technicians Nico and Jade argued cheerfully about cable management, and for a few hours the ordinary world of broken printers and misbehaving Wi-Fi grounded me. But even there, in the comfort of solvable problems, a thought kept circling like a hawk riding a thermal. If I stayed who I'd always been, nothing would change. If nothing changed, I would keep paying for the story where Miles tries and I fix. At lunch, I walked this block twice, hands jammed in my jacket pockets. A plan didn't arrive fully formed. I'm not a schemer by nature. What arrived was a pivot, small but decisive. I would not explain myself to anyone who mocked the help I'd already given. I would not play the villain in a script I didn't write, and I would not under any circumstances send another dollar because someone else thought my balance made it painless. The moment I decided that the street looked different, same brick, same awnings, same smoke from the walk place on the corner, but as if the focus had finally snapped into place. That evening, as the sun slid behind the warehouses and turned the shop windows amber, I locked up and checked my phone. A new message from Miles waited on the screen, a blurry photo of his kids eating ice cream, both of them grinning with chocolate on their lips. "They say thanks, Uncle A," he'd written, followed by a thumbs-up emoji and a winking face. I stared at the picture until my eyes stung. Love and resentment can sit in the same chair. They just don't look at each other. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and started the engine. The steering wheel felt cool under my hands. Out beyond the windshield, the city lightened into evening brake lights threading toward the river. I knew a conversation was coming, maybe several. I knew there would be pressure and persuasion and the kind of silence that drips guilt like a leaky faucet. But for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing to catch. I was bracing to stand. And somewhere in that new posture, solid feet, unlocked jaw, a more precise thought took shape, careful and deliberate, like a tool laid out on a workbench. It didn't feel like revenge. Not yet. It felt like alignment. The beginning of a plan that would start with a single simple act. No. The week after I'd decided that no was a complete sentence, my phone lit up with Mom. She never calls in the middle of the workday unless the matter is either urgent or delicate. I stepped into the hallway past a shelf of labeled routers and a humming UPS and answered, "Adrian, honey." Ruth began cushioning the words in that careful tone she uses when she's already chosen the outcome. "I wanted to say again how grateful we are for how you helped your brother. You've always been solid." I waited. Compliments in our family often arrived with a hook. "It's just that things are still complicated," she added. "Late fees, odds and ends. Your father and I were thinking if you could top it up a little, it would take the pressure off the kids." There it was, the phrase that made generosity sound like a leaking bucket. I pictured the green check mark on my banking app again, the sum I'd sent siphoned out of plans I'd made for my own life. I swallowed and said evenly, "I've already done my part, Mom." A pause. "Of course you have, of course. It's just Miles isn't built like you. He's trying. He just needs a bridge." We ended on polite vowels, neither of us convinced. Back at my desk, Jade slid a ticket across the counter and glanced at my face. "Printer meltdown?" she asked. I forced a smile. Something like that. 2 evenings later, my phone chimed with a message from Sophie. "Thank you again. We're doing our best. It's just, we may need a little more to get truly stable." Attached was a photo of the kids coloring on the floor legs, crossed tongues peeking from the corners of their mouths. The picture made it harder and easier all at once. I didn't reply. When pressure didn't work, pageantry arrived. Dad turned 62 that Saturday, and Daniel firmly insisted we all come by for an early dinner. No fuss, he'd said. Just family. He meant just family and any unspoken resentments that would squeeze into the room with the potato salad. I brought him a fishing reel he'd been eyeing for months, sleek graphite, the kind of gift that says, "I listen when you talk about small dreams." He grinned surprised and genuinely pleased, and for a moment the static in the air cleared. But it took exactly 1 minute for the clouds to roll back. "Well, look at that!" Miles said loudly as Dad tested the drag. Adrian showing off again. "You sure you didn't want to just write a check? You're good at those." The table chuckled in the way people do when humor is safer than honesty. Aunt Lila busied herself refilling glasses that were not empty. Tom studied a water ring with anthropological focus. I held the smile in place until my face felt like ceramic. Later in the kitchen, Miles cornered me by the back door, the porch light casting a halo on steam rising from the casserole. He lowered his voice to what he probably imagined was brotherly. "Look, man, about the money. It helped, but it didn't put out the fire. You know, if you could float me, say, another 22, we could breathe. I'll pay you back when the new gig lands." "What gig?" I asked. He waved a vague hand. "You know, prospects. I've got irons in the fire." "Then sell an iron?" I said more sharply than I intended. "I'm not your fire department." He blinked, recalibrated, then smiled as if I'd made a joke. "You'll come around. You always do." The certainty in his tone was worse than a plea. A plea admits you could say no. Certainty tells you the decision is already on your calendar. Something inside me pressed back harder than before. "I meant it," I said. "No." He gaped a split second, then laughed. "You're serious?" "I am." His mouth hardened, and for a moment the performance dropped. "You don't get it, do you? You don't have kids. You don't understand the pressure." "I understand numbers," I said, "and respect. You have a deficit in both." He left in a huff, muttering something about how I'd changed. Maybe I had. Maybe that was overdue. The following Thursday, Mom texted lunch, Sunday, just us 4. The euphemism for a family meeting in my childhood was just us. I arrived with berries and a neutral expression. The dining room smelled of lemon oil and roast chicken the way it always had before tests. College decisions, job talks, the scenes where my choices were laid out and measured. We ate. We made small talk about weather work orders, the neighbor's new dog. Then plates were cleared and a folder appeared on the table with the inevitability of a bill. "Your brother is underwater," Dad said, voice even. "We thought maybe we could all be practical about this. Make a plan." "I have a plan," I said. "It begins and ends with me not funding his mistakes." Mom flinched at the word mistakes as if I'd cursed. "Adrian, please, language." "Accuracy," I corrected softer than I felt. Footsteps on the stairs. I hadn't realized Miles and Sophie were upstairs with the kids. They came down the last few steps in tandem, as if entering a stage on their cue. Sophie squeezed Mom's shoulder as she took a seat. Miles didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, hands in his pockets, chin lifted like a man delivering a speech he'd rehearsed in traffic. "All right," he said. "Let's cut to it. We've consolidated everything. With a 28,000 push, we can clear the liens, reset the mortgage, and bring the car current. Once I start with Jasper's, it's a managerial thing. Cash flow will stabilize. This is a short bridge." There was that word again. Bridges are built, I wanted to say, not begged into existence. Dad looked at me, eyes weary but expectant. "Son, I've already answered this," I said. "No." Sophie's mouth tilted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "It must be nice," she said softly, "to choose independence over family." Heat roared in my ears. It must be nice to treat other people's savings like line items. Miles sighed as if I were a stubborn appliance. "Fine," he said, and slid the folder toward me. Then at least sign off on this so I can get a lower rate. It's a formality. I opened the folder. Inside, on crisp paper with a lender's watermark, my name appeared several times typed neatly in the boxes where identity lives. Adrian Hale, my address, my social security number, and at the bottom a signature that looked like someone had traced my name from memory and then learned calligraphy at speed. It wasn't perfect, but it was practiced. For a second, I couldn't place the sounds in the room. Conversations from the street drifted through the screened window, ordinary and far away. A fork clinked in the kitchen. Somewhere a child laughed at a cartoon. In front of me lay a line of credit application I hadn't seen before arranged, so that all I needed to do was nod and let it live. My fingers were suddenly cold. I slid the page closer. Where did you get this? Miles didn't blink. A friend. He's helping. They'll only process it if you verify. It already has my verification, I said, tapping the false scrawl. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, thinner and very still. This is my signature. Sophie folded her arms, chin high. It's a placeholder, she said. Everyone does it to get the wheels turning. You can't expect lenders to wait while people dither. I looked to my parents. Mom's hands were clasped tight, knuckles pale. Dad's jaw worked a small grinding I recognized from nights he couldn't sleep. Neither of them spoke. You forged my name, I said finally, not rising, not shouting, just naming the thing as if naming would make the room remember itself. You used my identity to open credit. Miles rolled his eyes in a pantomime of exasperation. You're being dramatic. It's not fraud if you agree. I do not agree, I said, an hour later. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Sophie let out a hiss of breath. We are trying to keep a roof over your niece and nephew. And you're splitting hairs over a scribble. Those hairs, I said, are the law. And the roof you're talking about, you've been setting it on fire for years and calling me the fire hose. Miles leaned forward, palms on the table. You think you're better because you learned how to send invoices and say no. You've always had a cushion. You don't even know what it is to be scared. I pushed the folder back across the wood, careful not to smear the ink that pretended to be mine. I know exactly what fear is, I said. I also know how to stop feeding it. Mom finally found words. Adrian, she whispered. Can't we solve this privately? Keep it in the family. I turned to her. That's how it got this far. Dad's voice when it came was rough. Miles, he said, not looking at me. This was wrong. Dad Miles groaned as if we were tedious. It's a form. It's a felony, I said. Another beat. Somewhere in the house, the kids thumped down the hallway. The sound reminded me of the photo on my phone, chocolate smiles and paper crowns. Love and resentment, same chair. The chair was getting crowded. I stood tucking the application into the folder and then into my bag. Miles reached as if to stop me. I stepped back. I'm taking this, I said. If there are any other documents with my name on them, gather them now. I'll wait. You can't, Sophie began. I can, I said and watched my father nod once small. He left and came back with a stack of unopened mail and a manila envelope. We sat through the sorting. My name appeared on 2 pre-approvals and 1 line of fine print that suggested someone had been fishing. I took those too. When there was nothing left to reveal, I shouldered the bag. I won't be your safety net anymore, I said, directing the words to the wood grain because the faces were too much. And if you use my name again, I won't be your silence either. Miles laughed a short, humorless bark. What are you going to do, sue me? I looked up. I'm going to protect myself, I said, from now on. I left to the tune of my mother's muted sob, and my brother's muttered curses, stepped into light as thin as tissue, and didn't breathe properly until I reached my car. On the passenger seat, the folder sat like a live wire. I stared at it and felt the knot under my ribs harden into something else. Not anger, not yet, but an edge. On the drive home, I rehearsed what would come next, not emotionally, but logistically. Credit freezes, alerts, calls, counsel. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like alignment again, more precise this time, a reciting of tools and lines. I would choose words that held up in fluorescent light. I would learn codes that unlocked doors. I would be as quiet and relentless as gravity. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A text from Miles. You're overreacting. Families take care of each other. Another from Sophie. If this blows up, it's on you. I let the screen dim, the message shrinking to a thin bar of light in the corner of my vision. The signal turned green. I drove. By the time I parked, the edge had settled into resolve. I took the stairs two at a time, unlocked my door, and laid the folder flat on the kitchen table. I turned on the lamp, smoothed the paper, and took a photo not for drama, for record. Then I opened my laptop, and began typing the first email of many, with subject lines that used words like fraud alert, identity verification, formal notice. Outside, the city exhaled into evening. Inside, I finally felt my feet beneath me. The net was gone. The ground was real. Monday began like triage. I wasn't angry so much as methodical. Anger burns fast method fixes things. I pulled credit reports, set freezes, added fraud alerts, created pins where there hadn't been any, and changed the handful of passwords I'd kept out of inertia. At the bank, Marisol, my branch manager, walked me to her office and closed the door. We added verbal passphrases, flagged my profile, and turned on notifications that would light my phone if so much as a breeze touched my credit. Identity theft is often familial, she said, not unkindly. Harder to believe, easier to prove. I believe it, I said. That afternoon, I met with an attorney I'd seen speak at a small business seminar, Mara Keating, brisk and exacting without being cold. I placed the folder on her conference table the way you set down a live thing, gently ready to move. While she read, I watched the faint lines appear and disappear at the corners of her eyes. "This is clean," she said at last, tapping the forged signature. "Not neat clean. You have the original, you have the context, you have witnesses to a confrontational disclosure. Keep building. Don't confront emotionally. Confront procedurally." Meaning, document, date stamp. Do not editorialize. If he uses your name again in proposals, pitches, texts, you will have a pattern, not a story. Patterns persuade. On her advice, I filed an identity theft report, created a paper trail with the bureaus, and opened a numbered folder on my drive labeled ADH Protection. Inside it, scans, PDFs, screenshots, a running log with times and details. I wrote as if a stranger might need to understand what happened without me in the room. The writing itself steadied me, and then I went back to work. The first benefit of saying no was time. Time I used to spend soothing chaos slid back into my days like a river returning to its bank. I answered tickets faster, checked in on clients I hadn't had bandwidth to visit, and started the procurement process for the upgrades I'd postponed. By Friday, I'd signed for 4 new laptops and a label printer I'd wanted for 2 years but could never justify while my accounts hemorrhaged surprises. "Christmas in March," Jade said, running a reverent hand over the boxes. Nico whooped at the labeler like it was a puppy. We rearranged the front counter, archived old cables, and set up a standing shelf for loaner machines. None of it was glamorous. All of it felt like oxygen. I slept better. I ate food that wasn't whatever survived in a takeout container. I ran again badly at first, huffing past the same 3 trees on Briar Street until the 4th tree stopped, feeling like a rumor. On Saturday mornings, I made coffee at home and sat with a book while the building woke up around me. It turned out quiet wasn't empty. It was full of things I hadn't let myself notice because noise had claimed the rooms. The messages from Miles kept coming, switching tone like a guy flipping radio stations in traffic. "We're good, no thanks to you." Then, "Can we talk?" Sophie's worried. Then, "Saw your new laptop stack. Must be nice." Then a photo of his kids again, gummy pink mouths around popsicles, followed by, "Remember, they're the ones you're hurting." I didn't reply. Silence did not feel like surrender. It felt like strategy. My parents were quieter now, too. Ruth's texts devolved into weather and recipes, as if language could retreat to grounds that didn't hurt. Daniel sent a link to a fishing forum and a thumbs-up emoji that meant "I think I'm here" awkwardly. At Aunt Lila's the next month, the table dynamic shifted by degrees I could feel more than name. Tom asked about my hiring process and unprompted mentioned he'd told Miles he couldn't invest in anything right now. Rhea sat beside me and under the veil of clinking plates said simply, "We see you." It wasn't absolution. It was recognition. It helped. The first external tremor arrived through a back door. A consultant I sometimes subcontract for Benji at an industrial printer company called one afternoon to confirm whether I was still in on a side venture with my brother. "What side venture?" I said, turning away from the front counter so Nico wouldn't read my face. "Something he's calling a small logistics play," Benji said. "He mentioned you as a quiet partner." wanted me to introduce him to two of my clients. I figured I'd check. My heart didn't spike anymore in those moments. It solidified. I'm not involved in anything Miles is pitching. If he says otherwise, he's lying. Please put that in writing. Benji whistled. Copy that. I logged the call, saved the follow-up email, and sent it to Mara with the subject line she'd taught me, potential representational fraud heads up. Her reply was quick. Good. Don't tip him. Let him repeat himself. The next encounter wasn't a call. It was a party. Cousin Eden turned 30, and in the rented hall with its polite string lights and rented optimism, Miles found a corner with two of the well-off uncles who always show up in sports jackets regardless of weather. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but corners are bad at keeping secrets. Adrian's already backing me, Miles said, low and confident. He just doesn't like to put his name on things. You know how he is. They murmured in that non-committal way men do when their money wants to be convinced. I didn't interrupt. I excused myself to the parking lot, took a photo of the sky because looking up helps you breathe, and texted both uncles the next morning. Do not invest in anything that uses my name unless you have a signed, notarized document from me. As of now, none exists. They each replied within a minute. Understood. Word moves fast in families. By the following weekend, 3 separate relatives had checked with me about pitches they'd nearly entertained. Each time I gave the same neutral language copied to my log. I am not involved. Please do not use my name. Mara suggested the next step. I want a cease and desist, I said. Formal. Not a text, not a family email that becomes a referendum. She smiled without softness, already drafted. We discussed delivery. She proposed FedEx to the house. I proposed something more surgical. His workplace, I said. Addressed to him, attention personal, but the kind of envelope a supervisor will hand over because it doesn't look like spam. That will sting, she said. That's the point. Wednesday morning, the letter arrived at Jasper's Automotive where Miles had finally landed a service manager role he'd been crowing about. By lunch, my phone lit like a console. First a call, then 3, then 7. I let them rot in voicemail. Then a text. What did you do? Another. My boss opened it. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Then, you're trying to ruin me. I typed and erased 3 drafts before settling on 12 words. You used my name. I asked you to stop. Now you will. He called again. This time I answered. You sent a lawyer letter to my job. He exploded, forgetting there's no volume limit in fury. You think you're a big man now? You think they won't stand by me? Your boss isn't my concern, I said. My name is. It was just a placeholder, he hissed. Everyone starts paperwork that way. Everyone who commits crimes, I said. You're dramatic. I'm precise. He started to say something else, something about loyalty or blood or what people owe each other, and I hung up. When the phone rang again, I let it. When it stopped, the quiet in the shop felt earned. The ripple was immediate. The relatives Miles had been warming with his sales patter cooled. One texted me a screenshot of his message, Adrian's overreacting because he has a control problem. Another relative replied to him, bless Rhea, or because you keep taking his life raft and calling it a pool float. Mom called that night voice small. Did you have to send it there? She asked. Yes, I said. I tried private. Private kept getting forged. She didn't argue. She did what I used to do. She tried to keep the peace by naming it weather. Your father's worried, she said. Your brother's upset. He should be careful with upsetting, I said. It has consequences. The next month pulsed with a strange duality, my life inching brighter while Miles is dimmed by his own hands. I hired a 4th tech Sahana who asked smart questions and labeled everything better than any of us. We landed a school district contract because a superintendent's cousin liked how we'd treated her ancient laptop, like it deserved respect. I flew to a vendor conference in Chicago and shook hands with people whose names appeared on slides I'd once taken screenshots of for aspiration. I posted a photo of the river dyed green for a holiday I didn't celebrate, and because the sun hit the water like spilled paint, even I liked it. Miles texted, must be nice. Then minutes later, don't forget who you're leaving behind. The guilt didn't vanish. It changed shape. It no longer said, fix this. It said, do not widen the hole by throwing yourself in. I missed my niece's recital because I couldn't stand being in a room where every glance felt like a ledger. I sent flowers with a note that made no promises and slept badly anyway. But the bad nights didn't stack up the way they used to. Between them stood days that felt chosen. Two more contacts reached out about Miles using my name. One was a former client of his, a contractor who'd heard there was family money behind a parts reselling scheme. I asked for the PDFs. He sent them. In one, my name appeared in a paragraph as vapor secured by a silent partner with established credit. I printed it, highlighted it, dated the margins, scanned it back into the folder. Patterns persuade. Mara called after reading that set. "We have enough to put real teeth behind the letter," she said. A second notice. "And if there's one more incident, we can move to reporting." "Not yet," I said. "Let him decide what kind of story he wants to be in." "That's magnanimous," she said. "It's practical," I said. "He always shows you who he is if you stop cushioning the ground." In quieter hours, I took inventory of myself, not like a person filing taxes, but like a carpenter checking tools. What do I actually have skills? A company. Friends who joke loud and show up quietly. A spine I thought was compromise, but turned out to be mercy. Mercy, I was learning, is only mercy if it isn't coerced. At Eden's follow-up brunch after the official birthday nonsense was over, I watched Miles work the room like a man trying to sell insurance after a storm. He smiled too wide at people who had already been warned. He shook hands a beat too long. Across the table, Tom met my eyes and made a tiny, grateful nod I wasn't expecting. Later, Aunt Lila pressed leftover cake into my hands with a look I recognized from childhood. We can't say it out loud, but we are saying it. On a Wednesday in late spring, the shop bell jingled and a courier stepped in holding a padded envelope with my name in sharp black letters. Inside, a polite letter from a private lender asking me to confirm participation in an application I hadn't seen. It didn't say Miles. It didn't have to. The timing, the phrasing, the echoes my name arranged like a scaffold for someone else to climb. I scanned it, filed it, and shot off 3 emails, Mara, the bank, the bureaus, with the same short subject line, "New attempt verification requested." I stood at the front window, envelope in hand, and watched Briar Street do its ordinary choreography, delivery truck stroller guy with the tiny dog who thought it was a bear. For months, I'd been preparing for the moment when preparation stops being hypothetical. The ground under my feet felt very real. The bell jingled again. Sahana peered around the shelf. "All good. Getting there," I said. Back at my desk, I pulled the folder closer and felt the shift I'd felt before, renewed and sharper. Not vengeance, not even victory, yet alignment. I had given him 100 ways to stop. He had chosen every way to continue. The pattern was no longer in dispute. It was a print. When my phone buzzed a half-hour later with an unknown number from a lender's area code, I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. Calm voice, standard script calling to verify participation. I saved the audio file to the folder, named it with the date and time, and sent it to Mara with a single line: "Ready when you are." The storm I'd been tracking wasn't drama. It was weather you could see on radar if you bothered to look. I'd looked. I'd mapped it. And when it finally broke, I didn't plan to shout. I planned to file. The envelope from the private lender was the last piece I needed, not because it was explosive, but because it matched the pattern with dull, prosecutable precision. I called Mara Keating and said, "Ready." "Good," she replied. "We'll move from warning to action." That afternoon, we assembled a packet thick enough to make its own sound my identity theft report. Bureau confirmations, the forged application, screenshots of texts, audio of lender voicemails, emails from relatives confirming he'd invoked my name, the cease and desist and delivery receipt to Jasper's Automotive. Dates on every page, names typed correctly. No adjectives, only facts. Mara's paralegal clipped it into sections like a spine. "We file with the State AG's Consumer Protection Unit and your local department's Financial Crimes Desk," Mara said. "Civil remedies are available too, but I want a case number first. It focuses people." "People," I said, and we both knew which person. Before she sent the filings, I made one stop: my parents' house. The light in their kitchen was the same yellow it had been my whole life. Ruth folded a dish towel when I set the binder on the table. Daniel cleared his throat, then didn't speak. "I'm not asking permission," I said. "I'm telling you what happens next." Mom opened to the first tab. Her eyes moved the way eyes move when the brain is fighting its own story. Dad took longer, tracing dates with a finger like he was following a river on a map. When they reached the letter to Jasper's mom pressed her lips together. At his job, she whispered. I tried private, I said. Private is where he forged my name. Dad nodded once. Not approval acknowledgement. Do what you need to do, he said. We were quiet a long minute, each of us reorganizing the furniture of our beliefs. Then I took the binder and left. Mara filed on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the case number lived in my email. The lender who'd asked for verification received a formal notice from my counsel. So did Jasper's HR. The bureaus added an extended fraud alert. The bank flagged variations of my name that could be typo-squatted an indignity I hadn't considered until someone imagined it. Friday at 9:17 a.m., Marisol from the bank called. One more attempt blocked. FYI, your file is now glowing. That's good. At 10:03, Jasper's HR phoned to acknowledge receipt and request any additional documentation. Mara handled it. At 10:47, my phone filled with Miles' 3 calls, then a torrent of messages. You did this. HR pulled me in like I'm a criminal. You ruined my job. I typed. Your choices did that. I protected my name. Then I set the phone face down and continued installing a printer driver for a client who cared only that their labels would finally align with their envelopes. The ordinary sanctified everything. The following week clicked forward with the bureaucratic rhythm of consequence. An officer from the Financial Crimes Unit called to take a recorded statement. He was patient and specific the way good mechanics are. Who had access, who said what, who saw which document when. I answered, grateful for the log I'd kept that let me say June 12th, 4:22 p.m., instead of sometime then. Relatives who had once floated between pity and pressure stopped floating. Tom texted. For what it's worth, I told him to cut it out months ago. Rhea sent a heart and a photo of leftover cake. Somehow that felt like strategy too. Aunt Lila asked if I'd still come by Sunday. I did. We ate peach cobbler while nobody mentioned law, which is its own kind of support. Sophie did not text. I heard secondhand that she was furious, then frightened, then quiet. I felt sorry for the kids and did nothing with the feeling because pity masquerading as help is how we got here. Jasper suspended Miles pending clarification. He called to scream about betrayal and family. I let the voicemail play in a window on my monitor while I finished a ticket. Then I saved the file to the folder titled ADH Protection and named it with the date and minute like all the others. Patterns persuade. A letter arrived from the AG's office confirming receipt and summarizing statutes with unromantic clarity. Identity theft, forgery, misrepresentation. Words that often live in movies living now on paper with my name above them and a case number beside. I felt no triumph, just a settling. The ground was no longer soft. A small, unshowy grace my life kept going. Sahana finished a beautiful, boring inventory. Jade teased me about labeling the labeler. Nico put a plant in the window that kept not dying. I went for a run and made it to the 5th tree. I booked a quick flight for a client rollout and returned with a keychain shaped like their city's bridge. I liked that it held weight without boasting. 2 weeks later, Miles stopped shouting and started asking. The messages shifted in tone the way skies do when a front passes. We can fix this if you just call me back. Then I can explain the signature. Then, think about the kids. The one after that was just a photo of his front stoop after a rain captioned. Do you ever feel alone? I didn't answer any of them. Silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was offense. When I did hear his voice, it was by accident at a cousin's wedding where the band was too loud and the speeches too long. I stepped outside for air just as he rounded the corner. We saw each other from 15 feet. He looked smaller, not thinner. Smaller like a person who's been living in an echo chamber and finally stepped into a room that gives the words back unchanged. You happy, he said, not a snarl, just tired. No, I said, but I'm done being your permission. He tried a smile that didn't hold. You always thought you were better. I thought I had to be useful to be loved, I said. That's different. We stood a beat in a dusk that didn't care. He glanced at the door to the reception hall, then at the street. They'll never look at me the same, he said. They shouldn't, I said. Not until you're different. He shook his head like his neck hurt and walked away. In the end, there wasn't a spectacular crash, just a series of documented stops. The lender withdrew. Jaspers let him go. The AG's office kept the file open and active, which is government for, we see it and we're moving. No handcuffs, no courtroom speeches, at least not yet. Just accountability, slow and precise. On a Tuesday night in early summer, I closed the ADH protection folder and created a new one, ADH Boundaries. Inside, I put nothing. It didn't need contents to be real. It only needed a name I could point to when the old reflexes woke up asking to be useful. I still think about the kids. Sometimes I mail a book with a note that says, "Proud of you for reading." I don't put cash in the envelope. I don't discuss it with anyone. Gifts don't have to be admissions. The last voicemail I saved came late, close to midnight, the kind of hour confession likes. Miles's voice was hoarse, no performance left in it. "I need you," he said, and for a second I was a teenager again, the good son rehearsing rescue in my head. The feeling rose familiar as breath, and then because practice works, it passed. I deleted the message, turned off the lamp, and slept through the night. In the morning, I ran past the 5th tree and didn't count the 6th. At the shop, Sahana had already opened. Jade had already brewed coffee. Nico had already put the plant in the sun. The bell on the door rang ordinary and bright. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like finally standing on my own floor. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.